everyone. I'm Stephanie. I'm the On Point Stitcher, and I'm so excited to welcome you back for the 12 Days of Flossmas Day 2 for Peter Polar Bear. Now, I don't have a whole lot of polar bear stories for you. In fact, I really only have two, and they're a little bit lame, but they're still polar bear stories. The first story that I can think of was a while back when I was a younger kiddo, and my parents had taken me to the Washington, D.C. Zoo, and they were supposed to have their polar bears, but it was super hot that day, and they had put the polar bears inside with some air conditioning, and they weren't even able to have them in the section of their enclosure that you could see them because it was just so hot. So they were cleaning the polar bear enclosure as well. And, it was, even though the polar bears weren't out so that we could see them, it was still fascinating to me to be able to see the inside of the enclosure and where they would swim and where they would hang out. I just thought it was really cool anyway. Okay, so like I said, that was a little lame, but this one actually does have a real polar bear in it, so it's not that exciting either, but it actually had a polar bear. I was so excited to finally see my first polar bear in person a couple of years ago with my family. We used to live in Oregon, and we would go and visit the coast at least once a year. And the year that we knew that we were moving away from Oregon and coming back to Colorado, we decided to go all out on our adventure to the coast that year and to do something a little more touristy than we typically did. So we decided to go to the aquarium. Now, this aquarium wasn't the biggest aquarium, but it was the most fun aquarium that I had been into to walk in because half of their enclosures were outside and half of their enclosures were inside, whereas a lot of the aquariums that I had been to in the past were all inside. Now, they were trying to make it very Oregon friendly itself, and so they had a lot of animals that were from Oregon, but they also had animals that were not from Oregon, of course, because how in the world could we have a polar bear story with animals from Oregon? You won't exactly find polar bears in Oregon. But anyway, they had some amazing things. They had a outdoor penguin facility, an outdoor duck facility. They just had all types of aquatic animals that were native to Oregon. But they also had some really amazing animals that were not native to Oregon, such as polar bears. Now, this polar bear enclosure was absolutely gorgeous, and I wasn't able to get a picture of it because, like I said, this story is also somewhat lame. We went and saw the polar bears, and we were so excited because there were people all surrounding the enclosure, pointing and talking, which of course means that the animal is out. So we went over and we got to see this ginormous polar bear walk across the enclosure and then walk inside. And you know how it is at zoos, they have an area for the animals to go inside and then they don't come back out. They want to go take a nap or they want to go eat some leftover food or whatever it is that they do in the area that you can't go inside and around and go see them. But when I saw this animal, I was just amazed. It was so big and it looked so relaxed, And just seeing his hair shimmer in the sunlight was just so much different than anything I had ever seen before. Because, as you probably know, polar bear hair is actually hollow. So when the light hits their hair, it is bouncing off the inside of that hollow follicle and creating a luminescent looking piece of hair. And when it catches the light, you can actually see the difference in the way that their hair shimmers than anything that you have ever seen before. It is completely fascinating to watch a polar bear in front of you walking in the sunlight. It is just amazing. So, those are the only actual physical stories that I have of polar bears in my life, but I do have one more thing that comes to mind that is a happy memory when I think of polar bears, and that is the Coca-Cola polar bear. I just loved those commercials when they came out. They were the kickoff to the season. They usually started on Thanksgiving around the the game that was always playing, like the football game that was always playing. They always had a new commercial that would play during the Turkey Bowl, and it was always something that I looked forward to because I wasn't huge into football, but someone would always shout for me and let me know that the new Coca-Cola commercial was on, because Coca-Cola had a new commercial for about 10 years, and maybe they still do it. I have not seen one yet this year, but they would always come out with a new commercial, and to me it was like the kickoff to the holiday season because I always looked forward to it. And I have to say, I think my favorite commercial was the one where a polar bear comes out of a cave to see all of his friends sitting around, hanging out, drinking their favorite Coca Cola beverage. And they kind of look at him like, "You want one?" And he's like, "Yeah." And they toss him one. And then all of a sudden, this turns into a giant mistake because now the entire time he is trying to hang on to this Coca-Cola bottle because he has butterfingers. He can't seem to keep that thing in his paws, and the other polar bears come over to try to help him. And then the next thing you know, they are falling all over the place. He's knocking into them, sliding all over the ice, and it is just my favorite one because it makes me giggle and laugh even now to this day when I see it. If you have a favorite Coca-Cola polar bear commercial, let me know. I would love to go watch it. They still have some of them on YouTube. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, go and check out the polar bear Coca-Cola commercials. You will love them. They are so much fun. But I'd love to hear which one is your favorite, and I will go check it out. Well, since I don't have any more other polar bear experiences to share with you or memories to share with you, I would love to tell you about a silly bear story that my husband and I have. When we got married, we had our honeymoon in Tennessee at Dollywood, and it was just a wonderful stay. But on our way home, we decided that we would take the scenic route. So here we are in my husband's vehicle, and he was driving a Mitsubishi Eclipse, one of the newer styles. They actually didn't make this style for very long because of the terrible, absolutely terrible viewing in this vehicle. You literally could not see anything around you. It was basically sitting in a giant blind spot. You could see in front of you and you could see directly beside you, but you couldn't see anything else. It was terrible. And I really do think that's why they stopped making this. Now, I'm telling you this because this comes into play with part of the story. So bear with me. So we are taking the scenic route and we're going around all these twisty, turny, beautiful roads through the middle of the mountains. And in these mountains are all of these older wooden cabins that no one lives anymore. They are upkept for this particular drive, but they are just to look at. And beside them is this little creek, and every now and then you would see like a water mill, and it was just so fascinating to go through this back road. So on our way, we come around a bend, and there's all these cars kind of just off to the side of the road, and we can't figure out what's going on. And then we notice there are some people out of their car pointing down the way down by the creek. Well, of course, people have a habit of doing monkey see, monkey do. So we look over and we realize they are looking at a mother bear with her cubs. And it's not something that you see every day. So, of course, that would be why people would stop. So, we are thinking, well, let's stop and watch too, because it was actually quite comical. She was trying to go through the creek and get her cubs to follow her, and they would not put their paws in the water. It was like watching children. They would dip a toe in and just look at her like, nah, mom, not happening. Not a thing. Is there a way to go around? There's got to be a bridge here somewhere, right? And poor Mama Bear is just walking across the creek, and then she'd come back for them to try to coax them to follow, and they would just make these cute little noises at her like, "Nuh-uh, Mom, not happening." And she would try to push at them and try to gain their confidence, and she just could not get them to go across the water. Now, keep in mind, this water was not very tall. Mama Bear knew what she was doing. She knew those woods like the back of her paw, and she knew that this water was only maybe 6 inches deep. She knew where it would be best for her babies to go across the water. Now, something else to kind of keep in mind is we were all up on top of a cliff looking down at these bears. They were pretty far away from us. I would say they were at least a half a mile away from us down at the bottom of the creek. And the bears that are in that area are not huge bears. They're smaller black bears. So no one was in danger and everyone was keeping their distance, so everything was safe. But it was so funny, like I said, to watch this mom bear talking to her cubs and trying to coax them over, and they just wouldn't have it. So eventually, Mama Bear gave up and decided that they were going to go a different route. So she took them back around behind the cabin that was back there and just disappeared back into the woods. It was such an amazing thing to see. Well, what does this have to do with my husband's car? The one that you can't see anything and that is basically a blind spot. Well, I'm glad you asked. when we pulled off the side of the road, we were very near a cliff. And so we had to be very careful with how far we pulled over and where we pulled over. And where my husband pulled over, there was a tree in front of us and 2 trees behind us. So we were a little bit sandwiched in between these trees. So he looked at me and he said, "Babe, I can't see those trees when I sit down in my seat, and there's no viewing them. I have no idea how to see them." And I said, "Well, okay, what should we do?" And he said, "Well, I don't have a choice. I have to back up at least a little bit so that we can clear the tree in front of us. So what I need you to do is I need you to keep an eye on things, keep me in the mirror where I can see, and tell me when I get too close to the tree." So I'm very nervously thinking, this is not a good idea. I'm not going to do a good job at this. Well, I was right. So I get out and I'm keeping an eye on things. He's backing up, and the next thing I know, he's coming straight for that tree. And I don't know how to tell him that he's coming for it and that he's gonna hit it. So I'm waving at him and I'm telling him to stop. And he hits a patch of leaves that just slides him right into the tree. And he gets out, and he's not mad, but he's not surprised either. And he looks at me and he goes, "Honey, you were supposed to be watching the tree." And I looked at him and I didn't know what else to say aside from just being a goofball. And I said, "I did watch the tree. I watched as you drove into it." He didn't exactly think it was hilarious. And that's okay because I didn't know what else to do at the time. I knew he wasn't completely upset. We had already talked about we needed to get that car traded in for something else because it was so difficult to drive. But I felt terrible that I had done exactly what we didn't want to happen. I was supposed to be keeping his car safe, and instead, I made sure that he scratched it the way that we didn't want. Now, while I was trying to think of some things to share with you all, I asked my eldest daughter if she could think of any other fun little bear stories that we had. And she, of course, just kind of laughed and looked at me and just said 2 words: orange bear. And I looked at her and I said, "Are you sure?" And she said, "Sure, why not? I mean, it's a big part of our life, so why not?" And so let me tell you a little bit about Orange Bear. When I was a teenager, I told my mom that I wanted to start collecting teddy bears because my mom liked to get us things every now and then just to remind us that she loved us. And one of the things that she would typically get for us was a stuffed animal. So she would look for different types of teddy bears that weren't like your typical brown or black or white teddy bears. She would try to find me something that stood out from the bunch. And so I had purple teddy bears, and I had yellow and red, and I had one bear that was orange. And she was super cute and super soft, and I just absolutely loved her. Now, when I moved out, I had so many teddy bears that I couldn't keep all of them. But I decided to keep a few, And Orange Bear was one of the ones that I kept because she was so unique and I just loved her that much. So I put her in my special stuffed animal bag and I gave the rest of them to a teddy bear charity in my city. The bag of different stuffies would follow me everywhere for the next several years. And sometimes they would come out and they would stay on the guest bed or they would stay on a shelf. And sometimes they had to go back in the bag and go in storage because they didn't have a place at the time. And one day I was in the crawl space, and my eldest daughter was probably about 5 or 6 years old. And I came across the bag of stuffies, and she's standing there at the opening of the crawl space, just watching me as I'm looking for something. I don't even remember what I was looking for, but she sees me come across this bag, and I said, "Oh, now this is a special bag. Have I shown you what's inside this bag?" And she had this big grin on and she said, "No." So, of course, I pulled this bag out and sit down on the floor with her, and we open it up and we're looking at these different stuffies in there. And all of a sudden, her little face just completely lights up. And she says, "Mommy, what is that?" And I said, "Well, it's an orange bear that Nona gave me." And she just had to have that bear. So she gives this bear a giant hug and looks at me and says, "Can I have it?" Of course I said yes. And she walked around with that bear for years. Orange Bear is no longer orange. Orange Bear is very loved. Her nose is all squished in, but she is absolutely beautiful to my daughter. She still keeps her on a shelf right beside her bed. Well, we are nearing the end of Peter Polar Bear here, and I did not video the rest of the back stitching because I didn't want this video to be too incredibly long, but I want to say thank you for coming and listening to me ramble, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.